There aren't many story tropes that hit me quite as hard as friends becoming enemies. I'm a massive X-Men fan, I grew up with Smallville and the Star Wars prequels, The Prestige is my favorite Christopher Nolan film, Transformers 1 is a shockingly great movie that deserved so much more, I love Berserk, the Usopp and Luffy fight broke my soul, and of course I have enjoyed Ichigo vs. Uryu even if I still don't fully believe that it's legitimate. I see you, Uryu, I see what you're doing. I see what you're doing. But yeah, this group of chapters, fittingly titled Friend, was right up my alley. I love a dramatic separation that turns friends into foes, but did this section of Bleach deliver on its premise? Did I care about the shattered brotherhood of two newer characters that I didn't know very well up to this point? Well, let's talk about it. So there's been a few non-Soul Reaper wildcards on the battlefield. Grimmjow's been doing his own thing and paying for it, but we also had the 3 Vondenreich soldiers that survived the Auswählen, and they were looking for some payback after essentially being abandoned and betrayed by their god and everything they believed in. We've got Lil Toto, Giselle, and Bazz coming to the Soul King's palace solely for some revenge. They don't care about the war, they don't care about saving the universe, they just want some payback. Gigi and Lil Toto go looking for the Quincy King himself, while Bazz is much more interested in facing Haschwalth. Before we get into that conflict that's given more attention, let's first talk about Lil Toto and Gigi trying to take on Yhwach. Listen ladies, I know you're angry, you have every right to be, you're pissed off, but this just seemed really unwise. But at this point, I guess, what else are they supposed to do? They have nothing left, so might as well go big. I loved the anime edition of Giselle reuniting their friend group with the rest of them now as her zombies. Not only was it fun to see them all sort of together again, but it just made sense that Gigi would do that. She is not going to let her so-called friends rest in peace. That is not what she does. We saw that with Bambi, but I loved how this went even beyond that. Not that they really helped much. Nothing was really going to help make much of a difference against Yhwach, unfortunately. Gigi could have taken the time to reanimate every single dead soldier down below and unleashed an army of zombies on Yhwach, and I still don't think it would have made a difference, to be honest. This was a losing battle from the start, but I think that's the point for all of them and for all of this. With nothing else than being betrayed by the cause they used to fight for, vengeance is all that's left, and they try their hardest to get it even if they know they won't win, and I'm sure they knew that going in. It's the only thing that remains. Whatever purpose they thought they were achieving with the Sternritter isn't happening now. That's what being part of all of this has done to them. While Yhwach has made his play to change the universe, he's left his underlings with nothing because their own goals and their own lives never mattered to him. They only mattered as far as their power benefited his own, and I'm sure that's the realization that ran through all of their heads and set them on this doomed path. The only path they really had anymore. But Bazz, at least initially, feels like he might possibly be able to put up more of a fight against his own opponent. His revenge feels slightly more within reach as he challenges Yhwach's right-hand man, Haschwalth. And it turns out that they have even more of a connection than I thought they did. From very early on in this arc, we saw the tension between Bazz and Ugram Haschwalth. I just chalked it up to one of them being willing to speak out and reject Yhwach's authority while the other was clearly extremely loyal to their king. The difference between the characters was obvious from the get-go, but the depth of their animosity wasn't something I expected, really. No, it turns out these two surprisingly share a lot of history together, a history where they were actual friends, and the prospect of that alone was intriguing. How could these two characters, who are so different, have once been best pals? And it turns out the truth of their shared past gives us not only great insight into their characters nowadays, but also gives us a peek at the inception of the Sternritter itself. So we take a look back to a time long ago. Over 1,000 years ago, it seems, which is pretty wild. I've got to say, of the Vondenreich members we have nowadays, I didn't expect to find out Haschwalth and Bazz are as old as they are. Like, maybe Haschwalth, but he's never been included in any of the few brief glimpses we've gotten when we've seen the Quincy King's original royal guards. You know, people like the eye patch guy, rifle girl, and this Nazi. I hate this guy. A little more on him later, but I I have to wonder, since Hugo and Bazz shared space with some of the Leaked Reich characters, where were they when the Leaked Reich was destroyed? Were the Sternritters specifically ordered to escape into the Shadow Realm while the rest of the Empire collapsed? I don't know, but this makes me wonder. But yeah, I was surprised to see that Bazz and Haschwalth are from this time period. We've seen people like Asnot didn't join until much more recently, considering the hospital he was recruited in, but it has seemed more and more likely that many were recruited throughout various points of the millennia, but I think these are the oldest of the people we've seen, maybe? Well, except for Pernita. I guess technically we saw him back then in the animes. But yeah, Haschwalth and Bazz being such early recruits is surprising right off the bat for me. Before this, I kind of imagined Bazz got recruited when he was like harassing people in an arcade or on some California pier back in the 1980s or something. But nope, he's just a very, very old punk. When we meet Haschwalth and Bazz back then, they are just children in the forest, and I like that they come from what seems to be two very different social classes as well, where Bazz apparently came from a noble Quincy house, while Haschwalth seemed to come from something much less glamorous, which was a nice spin on what it might seem in our time, where Haschwalth currently presents himself as much more refined and dignified, while Bazz is more of this ruffian kind of guy with no manners and always flying off the handle. So that was a nice touch, because then I spent the reading curious about how that switch up even happened. And this is such a classic kind of story where two kids from different kinds of worlds meet in a place where all of that doesn't matter, where they can just go out into the woods and make a friend, and they aren't burdened by societal corruption yet before adulthood snuffs out their innocence, at least mostly. Sure, Bazz, even as a kid, declares that he is superior and that Haschwalth can be his squire, but that honestly seemed still fairly innocent. Like, he didn't treat him horribly like he was a peasant or anything, but he definitely looked down on him. Even still, they become fast friends in a way that kids seem to be able to do so easily, you know? They barely know each other and immediately they're like best friends. There's some Bridge to Terabithia vibes at first out here in the woods, and that didn't bode very well. I only watched that movie recently and it was not what I expected. For like 20 years I thought that Bridge to Terabithia was some Chronicles of Narnia knockoff or something. My wife flat out tricked me and had me watch it, and I was not ready for that trauma. If you know, you know. Anyway, Bazz back then thought very highly of himself because of his apparent natural abilities, while Haschwalth, or Hugo as Bazz called him, had like no abilities to speak of. None. Hugo couldn't make arrows, he couldn't gather reishi, he's just this kind of dud, and that clearly weighs heavily on him, as it would for anyone. He's a Quincy, he's supposed to be able to do these things, and he just can't. And it made me really think back on what we've seen from Haschwalth in the war, and yeah, he's only ever drawn his sword, but we've never seen him really do much else. There was the scale thing he did with presumably his shrift, but since that was gifted by Yuabaha, I'm not really counting that, I don't think, but we also still don't know much about it either. As far as reishi, he hasn't used it, because as it turns out, he can't. And from what we learn from Bazz, Quincy's being born without Quincy abilities isn't unheard of, but it is extremely, extremely rare, like it only happens every few hundred years. Obviously, that gives Haschwalth a bit of an inferiority complex. He feels like a freak, he feels left out, he feels like he's a weakling, and it may not just be because he's like a squib, but it seems to be other factors as well that are making him this kind of meek individual, especially in comparison to how Bazz acts. While it isn't focused on, I got the impression that Haschwalth's uncle was definitely some abusive creep, and while we never actually see him, we get enough for me to absolutely hate his guts. I actually like that he's mostly unseen, and it makes him all the more unsettling. All it takes is a few lines of dialogue and Hugo's demeanor to give such an eerie feeling of what horrible things could be happening at home. It's properly uncomfortable, it feels very real to unfortunately what happens in some households, and does a lot with very little. And when we hear that he died off panel, Haschwalth definitely doesn't seem too upset about it. Not showing the uncle in his entirety, living or dead, allows us as viewers to almost solely judge him based on Hugo's reaction, and that's so powerful to focus on how the victim is affected. We don't go too into it, like I said, but we see just enough to gauge how it might have affected Haschwald. Him coming from a broken, most likely abusive home is actually pretty telling as to why he may be the way that he is in his adulthood. And when it comes to Bazz's family, well, the members of his noble house are massacred in front of him during a conquest by Yhwach and his original forces, which was horrifying, especially in the anime when we actually saw Bazz's perspective of it as it was happening. And I presume that this was his mom standing next to him who gets sniped. It was brutal, so terrifying, but selfishly, I'm glad we saw a tiny bit more of the previous regime in action, even in the middle of such horrible circumstances. I also think it helps paint the picture that Yhwach's reign over the Quincy's was not peaceful. And to me, there's also something powerful about Bazz witnessing this inferno that destroyed his home, and then eventually being given fire of his own. I'd imagine there's some deep connection there, or maybe even Yhwach gave him that ability to remind him of his pain. But I like the idea that the flames that took everything from him created a spark that gives him his fire. It's kind of perfect as a manifestation of his need for payback, that he wants to burn Yhwach just like his family burned. And that fire can be so powerful and burn so brightly, but it can also grow weaker and eventually die down into nothing but embers. There's something to that, and I actually think that his abilities are so fitting for him. And I liked the distinction that Bazz is declaring vengeance and wanting to get strong enough to get close to Yhwach to kill him, while Haschwald doesn't really want any of that, even when his uncle was also killed, which again is very, very telling. Yhwach is responsible for Yugo's uncle's death, just like he is for Bazz's family, but that familial relation doesn't mean the same thing to Yugo as it did to his friend. Even though they both lost family, it's not the same loss because those weren't the same families. To Yugo, Yhwach got rid of his tormentor, even if he didn't mean to, though I kind of think he did. Yhwach kind of became his savior, not someone that Yugo wants to get revenge on desperately. You know, he wasn't left in shambles as his family burned. He was probably a little relieved, honestly. But yeah, after losing their families, Bazz and Yugo only have each other. They stick together and they train and try to become powerful enough so they can join Yhwach so they can kill him, and one day they finally get their chance, as Yhwach's forces are recruiting potential candidates to be the first members of the Sternritter. It's a perfect opportunity and exactly what they want, so of course Bazz wants to prove himself because this will bring them one step closer to the ultimate goal. Unfortunately for him, the recruiter is one of the most hateable characters in the series for me. Hubert just needs to get a beat down with his whole fascist thing where he's calling people monkeys and being terrible. I hope whichever one of the original 13 captains killed Hubert made sure it was as painful as possible. I'm glad that the original 13 were all psychopaths and sadists and murderers, because that makes the chances highly likely that one of those guys really made him suffer, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Good. Hate this guy. He's low for me. He's low on the list, and he's so minor and he's only in a few scenes, but every second of him I'm like, ooh, don't like you. But yeah, at this point Hubert is being all smug and denying Bazz as Bazz is challenging him, and while I would have loved to see Bazz somehow beat him, it really was just leading to Yhwach's arrival, and what an arrival it was. I've always loved how spiritual pressure is used in Bleach to establish someone's power, and this scene is no exception. How everyone is kind of forced to bow to him, you know? Even Bazz gets sent down to his knees and he's struggling to get up as Yhwach arrives. Just being around him is so strong. That's always been such an interesting visual and an interesting character beats in Bleach. It really establishes strength so well, and it does an especially good job of showing the gap between characters. If you can't even stand being near someone, how are you supposed to beat them? How are you supposed to fight them? But it's here that everything in this flashback changes, and we really get the shift toward where we are now, as Yhwach reveals that he came for someone he wants to stand by his side, and Bazz is like, oh, of course it's me. I'm right here, it's me. And it turns out, as we know now in the present, Yhwach was interested in Yugo. This moment, when the schism between the two boys happens, is utterly brilliant. Bazz has been so certain that he is this prodigy and a genius and he's powerful, and that if Yhwach's gonna choose anyone, it would be him. He's He's of noble birth, he's skilled, he's tenacious, but he's passed over in that moment when he thinks he's about to get one step closer to his goal. He's so willing and so ready and fully believes in himself, only to have all of that shattered for a reason that he couldn't have imagined. Hugo, the kid he bumped into in the forest, the one inept Quincy that can't even do Quincy things, that Bazz considered ditching because he was so pathetic. That kid, his weak friend that he probably only keeps around to make himself feel better by comparison. That powerless friend is chosen by Yua and not Bazz. He gets passed over for Hugo. I can't imagine how he must have felt, having his entire perception of reality completely implode in front of his eyes. At first, it doesn't make any sense. All we've been told is that Hugo is weak and incapable and is the one that doesn't have a personal stake driving him. He's not strong. Even his best friend looks down on him. So how could he be chosen over Bazz? It doesn't make any sense to him. And the best part, the part that really gets me, is that Hugo is just as shocked and just as confused, and being the friend that he is even willing to sacrifice this honor and this opportunity and give it to Bazz instead. He begs for them to take Bazz instead, that there's been some sort of mistake, that surely they want Bazz, not him. But I'm sure this comes from his upbringing too. He came from nothing. When it comes to Quincy powers, he seemingly has nothing, and probably believes himself to really be nothing when it comes down to it. Hell, even Bazz pities him. But Yua doesn't see him that way. No, for perhaps the first time in his life, Ugram Haschwalt was valued. And like I said before, he doesn't see Yua in the same way that Bazz does. It was Bazz's revenge. Hugo just wanted to be supportive, to be a good friend, and he was. He was with Bazz for years, helping him, but he doesn't share that same wrath toward the Quincy King. No, from a certain point of view, Yua not only saved him from his seemingly abusive uncle, but then took him under his wing and told him that he was special. Because most importantly, Yua revealed that the things that Haschwalt felt most insecure about were not weaknesses, but were instead strengths. It's like God himself rescued Haschwalt from a life of abuse and humiliation and offered him salvation. He gave him security and a purpose, but more on that in a bit. Let's be honest, Bazz would have probably left Hugo behind if things went his way. The plan was to get strong enough to get close to Yua, but at least from what Bazz thought, Hugo wouldn't have been able to keep up. He couldn't do basic Quincy things. How would he have been able to be recruited with him? No, it seemed like Bazz was the only one that had a real chance, and that he was just, letting Hugo stick around and follow his greatness. But then the worst thing that could happen to Bazz happened. And it wasn't just that he was being turned down. No, it was why he was being passed over for Hugo. When Yua revealed that Bazz's progress, all of the growth he was rapidly gaining for years, had little to do with all of his training and all of his effort and all of the time he spent, and more to do with who he was traveling with. Bazz only got so strong because he was in Hugo's presence. Hugo unwittingly was giving Bazz power because, like Yua, he can share power with others because he's an anomaly in a similar way that Yua was. That him being this supposedly powerless Quincy actually was what made him incredibly important and incredibly special, that he wasn't a freak. Instead, he was unique and worth more than any regular Quincy is. So it's not just that his friend was chosen over him. That would be bad enough for Bazz. But it turns out that Hugo was the one helping Bazz and not the other way around. And that is what Bazz really can't stand. It strips away everything, any confidence, any accomplishment, and to have his dream and his pride taken away by someone he had believed to be inferior to him for years. Yeah, he doesn't take it well. But yeah, Bazz is pissed. He's shocked, he's confused, and he's angry. And even once he eventually became part of the Vondenreich too, he still challenges Haschwalt time and time again, only to be denied. It might seem odd to say at first, but bear with me. Haschwalt's story is a classic Cinderella story. He came from pretty much nothing, only to be plucked from obscurity and rise to a position of great importance. Hell, he also seemed to have a mean family member, and Bazz is kind of an accidental fairy godmother, or would that be Yuabaha? Or would Yuabaha be Prince Charming and find him and give him status? I don't know. You know what I mean. This was never gonna be one-to-one. The point is, for him, this is a fairy tale come true. While Bazz's dreams are completely shattered, Haschwalth gets to become respected for the first time in his life, while still remaining a follower who doesn't have to make his own decisions, whose purpose relies on being helpful to the king he now serves. He has meaning now. But it's just like when he was following Bazz, he's now being led by someone that probably still doesn't really respect him and doesn't actually want what's best for him. But Yuabaha, in this moment, seems like someone that recognizes something of worth in him and believes in him. Maybe that's exactly what Yugo wanted and needed. The moment that Haschwalth definitively chose Yuabaha over his friend was so powerful, catching the arrow that Bazz desperately fired that was meant for the king. I loved that moment so much, not only for how it beautifully carried us back to the present with a transition, but also how that action is literally Yugo stopping Bazz's dream. Everything they had worked toward. Do I think that arrow would have killed Yuabaha? Definitely not, but it was more about what Yugo was willing to do and how he was willing to defend him when he was supposed to be helping kill him. It was such a powerful, definitive moment of betrayal that broke any remnants of their friendship apart. At that point, Haschwalth and Bazz became diametrically opposed, and that remained for years. He's just constantly trying to prove that, that was a fluke, that was a mistake, I'm superior to you. He's always trying to prove that. But Yugo always denies him. And I don't think it's coming from a place of he doesn't share the animosity towards Bazz that Bazz has for him. There was that great moment where you kind of see Haschwalth's feelings at the time of the betrayal, where he tried to get Bazz to be chosen over him, and he was trying to enjoy that moment of being finally seen as something, and he looks over at Bazz, and there's that great moment where he's like, why is Bazz looking at me like that? Shouldn't he be happy for me? If he was my friend, my real friend, wouldn't he want me to succeed? So powerful. Ugh, kind of off topic, but I'm thinking a lot about everything we've seen of Haschwalth right now, and what happened to this woman in Haschwalth's home from the manga, by the way. This scene was cut out of the anime completely, and we haven't ever come back around to her in the manga, but she was someone that he seemed to confide in, so I thought she'd show up at some point, but maybe Kubo pivoted away from whatever that part of Haschwalth's life is. I don't think we've ever seen her again, unless she was one of the, Quincy soldiers. Anyway, weird. Who was that? But yeah, Bazz never let go of this betrayal by his friend, and the resentment just built up over 1,000 years. And all the Sternritter or any of their rules doesn't matter anymore. Bazz isn't holding back. He's seen that the Sternritters meant nothing to Yuabaha, so none of those restrictions matter. None of the hierarchy matters. All that matters is the two of these people that used to be friends, and the betrayal that's never been answered for from Bazz's perspective. His anger toward his old friend has obviously been boiling inside of him all this time, and now he can finally unleash all of it, trying so hard to prove that he's superior, to prove that he didn't need Haschwalth to give him power. What I really appreciated about this duel was that it didn't paint these two as rivals like Bazz viewed them as. It made it clear that he was still far below Haschwalth, and that only added more insult to injury as he desperately tried to beat him, only for him to be outmatched the entire time. Kubo could have made it a closer fight with the same result, but part of what makes this all so powerful is the futility of Bazz's mission. His quest that he spent so many years trying to accomplish won't succeed, and he has desperately tried to prove himself for so long, but he's still unable to. There was a time when Haschwalth was willing to give his life for Bazz or throw away his own opportunities for Bazz, and now while he doesn't want to kill Bazz, he tries to stop the fight multiple times. He says, Sternritter shouldn't fight each other. I truly think he doesn't want to kill Bazz, even after everything, and how much Bazz wants to kill him. I think Haschwalth still has no desire to do that. Bazz is completely overcome with his need for revenge. But yeah, I never got the sense that Haschwalth ever harbored any real ill will toward his old friend, at least nothing even close to what Bazz was feeling. It was pity, if anything, and that was probably even worse for Bazz. I think he would prefer that Haschwalth just doesn't like him, but instead he just pities him. After what we've seen of their past, by the way, it's really satisfying to see Haschwalth as such a skilled swordsman, because we know that it all came from sheer discipline that he became this formidable. Hell, he doesn't even have to use his weird scale balance thing here. It's all just natural swordplay. He had to compensate for not having the natural talents that his comrades had, and I would say that he more than made up for it with how he handles Bazz B in this fight. Throughout this arc, my opinion on Haschwalth has mainly been that he's the sycophantic right-hand man who's loyal to a fault and only cared about serving his king. I've joked before that most of his lines seem to just be, "Your Majesty," but this whole segment hinted at so many more complex things going on beneath that turned him into this kind of character. Knowing what kind of childhood he had, even from just the little we saw, makes his complete devotion to his king so much more fascinating and a bit sad. He's never really found his own way. He has to keep following others to feel valued. I don't think he really values himself very much outside of how he can assist someone else. He's just been this walking battery. Now he's used by Yuabaha to switch places and stuff. But yeah, as the one-sided fight comes to a close, it's hard watching Bazz go down like this, trying his absolute hardest and having it mean nothing. All of this burning anger, this fire inside of him just gets snuffed out as he's cut down by someone he's wanted to defeat for 1,000 years, someone that was once a trusted friend. There's an especially tragic part of this that hit so hard once I realized, especially as someone that really enjoys the symbolism that swords can represent and what they mean for characters to wield. In the anime, we see the sword that Yugo picks up, and the one he still wields in the present, is an heirloom of Bazz's family that he discovered in the rubble after they're massacred, and from then on is what Yugo wields in service to his friend, and even beyond, all the way up until now, since it turns out to be the sword that he has in the 1,000-Year Blood War, and the same sword that he reluctantly strikes Bazz B down with. Bazard Black is killed by one of the remnants of his lost family, a piece of the people that he has tried to avenge for a millennium. From what we see, it's apparently one of the only things he still has from them, and yet he lets his friend have it. Maybe I'm reading too much into it since it's not actually addressed directly, but there's something to Bazz letting Yugo carry something like that, something that probably has so much sentimental value to Bazz. You would think he would take it, even though he's not really a swordsman, but he lets his friend keep it. And there are so many stories out there of people picking up the sword to avenge the previous wielder, and that's what it seemed Yugo was doing for Bazz's family. By helping Bazz, he was gonna wield that sword in the name of avenging them. It represented what Bazz thought was their shared dream, and since it came from Bazz's bloodline, it almost made Yugo family since he was the one now wielding it. It was a weapon that was gonna help strike down the person that was supposed to be their enemy, and instead, in the long run, after 1,000 years, that sword cut down the last member of the house that it once served. And that's just, wow. That blade had an interesting journey, and this was a definitive moment for it to be used in this way. It's like when Will Turner forged that sword in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and you see it go from hand to hand to hand, and it ends up returned to him in the third movie when he's stabbed by it. It's interesting to follow a sword's trajectory sometimes. And this, it just hits and perfectly captures the tragedy of what this friendship eventually became. For Bazz to be killed by something like this, by something that once belonged to the family that he loved and wanted to avenge, ugh. Bazard Black, as we learn his name is, dies having completely failed. But I like the acknowledgement that he may have always expected this. He knew that he wasn't going to win this fight, and yet he continued to challenge him so many times, pushed and pushed and pushed, until he finally had his chance, and then is killed so easily. Defeating Ugram Haschwalth was always futile, but this thirst for revenge, his desire to burn his enemies down just like his family had burned, the desire to be seen as someone of value, to burn brightly. It was all Bazz had. There's been a pretty consistent theme in Bleach that I talked about before with Komamura that is only reinforced with the story of Bazz. In this world that Kubo has created, revenge is not rewarded. It takes everything from you, you sacrifice everything, and you often don't get what you want. It's just a very sad, tragic story that I did not expect at all when I first met this character. I thought Bazz was maybe just going to be like a Grimjow type guy, and in some ways he is. But wow, this backstory was so much different than I thought we would get from him. But just as much as this is about the end of Bazz's life, I think a lot of this was even more telling about Haschwald. I loved the choice to not really show his reaction when he walks away from Bazz after striking him down. Those bright blue eyes that are given so much focus aren't shown at all as he walks away without a word. There's no final parting conversation between them. There's no apologies. There's not even any gloating. There's a powerful silence to Haschwald's reaction as he's walking up those steps, ascending to a place that Bazz cannot follow, where he has never been able to really follow, to a place that he never fully understood. It was so good, so powerful, so tragic, and I did not expect that for characters that I didn't know. Like, it hasn't been that long that I've known these characters, and I was not expecting to feel this emotional and have so much to think about with these two and their history. I actually didn't mind how the anime moved this whole thing further back to better coincide with, like, the growing climax here towards the end. It just makes sense to kind of emphasize the emotional significance of this confrontation as we're getting to a point where Haschwald seems to be becoming one of the final obstacles of the series. So yeah, I love this. I love this so much. I had a lot to say about it, obviously. It's fascinating that really didn't affect that much of the Bleach world, and Bazz doesn't accomplish what he sets out to accomplish. He doesn't make a big difference, I don't think, unless, you know, this emotionally impacts Haschwald. But yeah, this fight was so contained and really personal and didn't involve anyone else. Just this really tragic backstory here, which I appreciate because a lot of the Sternritter we haven't seen a lot of their past. So it was nice getting this in-depth look at a relationship between two of them. Loved it. Loved it so much. And we'll continue on into the story of Bleach. And towards the end of this final arc and the 1,000-Year Blood War, I'll see you guys next time. If you want to see more, there's hours and hours of content, manga read-alongs, anime reactions over on Patreon. So come join the fun over there if you want. Otherwise, I'll see you all soon. Take care. Bye.